Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good morning, dear members. It is always a pleasure to be in the Employment Committee, even early in the morning. I remember it's been a while since I presented the Youth Guarantee, but now on another very important subject. Also, I have the pleasure to present to you one of our newer products, which is not a typical special report with audit findings, conclusions and recommendations, but a briefing paper that is more descriptive, more analytical, without recommendations, but hopefully still useful for you to enrich the debate on this important topic. And starting directly with it, allow me to say a few words that the recent increase in the number of people seeking protection in the EU has brought, obviously, EU's migration policy high in the spotlight. And in the 4-year period from 14 to 17, almost 3.7 million people applied for asylum for the first time in the EU, which is 3 times more than in the previous 4 years. Other people come to live to the EU for other reasons, to study, to join their family, or for work. Migrants, who are the people that legally reside in the EU but do not have the nationality of an EU member state, make up around 4% of the EU population. And migration and integration are obviously closely interconnected. A number of studies have shown that integrating migrants effectively brings a number of long-term benefits, economic, social, fiscal, for the countries where they settle. And migrant integration in society is also primarily the responsibility of the member states. The role of the EU here is quite limited, to provide just incentives and to support the member states in this field. What is integration? The needs of different types of migrants can be, of course, very different, and integration potentially requires action in many areas, including education, housing, employment. Therefore, integrating the migrants is a challenging exercise for the EU collectively to face. Although no formal definition exists at EU level, in 2004 the Council developed 11 common basic principles for immigrant integration policy that you can see here on the screen. And as I said in the beginning, you will not see recommendations or conclusions, since this is just a briefing paper that summarizes the actions taken by EU institutions in the field of integration. In addition, we also provide in the next slide, actually that's a slide that's basically the whole presentation in brief, but this slide is most important because it summarizes the 7 challenges that we identified throughout our analysis. The first one of which relates to the need to reduce delays. According to studies, the earlier the integration starts, the more likely it is to be successful. Member states, of course, have some discretion as to how they implement migration policy in their own countries, which might be a reason for migrants to move from the country they first arrive into another country, delaying the start of their integration. Other factors may also delay this process, such as, for instance, long waiting periods to process applications. The second challenge we identified are the equal rights and anti-discrimination policies. Most member states, obviously, are making efforts to ensure that migrants are not discriminated. However, according to a survey that was held in 2017, the majority of Europeans, more than 50%, actually around 54%, have a negative feeling regarding immigration of people from outside the EU. And in our own survey that we held throughout the analysis, 4 member states reported that the attitude of the host population toward migrants has a negative impact on their integration. Next challenge, as usual, as we've seen also in other initiatives and policies, is the funding. The funding and the assessments of the needs is clearly unclear at this stage because a number of funds from the EU budget can finance action to integrate migrants. In response to the recent increase in the migration that I discussed in the beginning, the EU mobilized over 5 billion of additional funding, of which 115 million was specifically allocated for integration under the Asylum, Migration and Integration, or the AMIF fund. This amount potentially available is high, but only AMIF, which is relatively small compared to other structural funds, records data on integration that we could actually check and report on. Therefore, the total amount, if you ask me what's the total amount spent on integration by member states, we don't know. This amount is not known, nor is known the number of migrants who benefited from that, at this stage at least. Nevertheless, member states declared, in the context of the midterm review of AMIF, that more funds are needed to integrate migrants. And in our view, effective integration policies require a sound and comprehensive assessment of needs and should be funded, of course, by adequate resources made available at the right time. But without a robust estimate of the funding needed at national level and an understanding how EU funding can complement national interventions, there is a risk, there is a potential risk, and that is why we identified this challenge, that these policies might be ineffective. The fourth challenge we identified flows from the Commission's action plan for migrant integration, which was adopted in 2016, as well as setting out steps for the Commission to take. This action plan also encourages member states to focus their efforts on additional measures that they could take at the national level. However, these measures will not be monitored by the Commission, which may limit its ability to provide additional support to member states. Then the next challenge is actually supporting all migrants across all relevant policy areas. Some member states, what we discovered, have national integration policies. Some develop actions at local or regional level. Others incorporate migrant integration in other policies. However, again, from the survey that we held, we found that many member states actually do not take action in relation to some groups of migrants. For instance, young migrants or stateless people, they are not incorporated in these national strategies. In addition, the Supreme Audit Institutions reports we reviewed highlighted several shortcomings in the design and the implementation of the member states' integration policies. And we believe it is important that all migrants are supported across, of course, all relevant areas. The sixth challenge that we identified, again, is for the funding, in this case as well, relates to the availability of data, which is a challenge, a shortcoming that we see quite often also in other policies. This type of EU funding does not require, obviously, member states to specifically monitor the outcomes for migrants, whether actually the funding helps them to become integrated. And about a third of the respondents in our survey reported that they did not use any indicators to monitor the outcome. In addition, these reports from the Supreme Audit Institutions that we reviewed highlight that there is insufficient information on integration measures and a number of weaknesses also in the member states' monitoring systems. Because monitoring the outcomes of integration policies using reliable data, of course, would allow stakeholders to measure progress, to identify the limitations, to adjust the policies accordingly. Conversely, the absence of proper monitoring may prevent the real needs of migrants from being addressed. And last but not least, the seventh challenge that we identified relates to the complexity of the funding arrangement. It's in a way related also to the third challenge. But what we discovered was that the legislation requires member states to have coordinating mechanisms to maximize synergies and minimize overlaps. However, the survey again showed that not all member states had such mechanisms, that only 3 had issued guidance on coordination. And the need for a strong national leadership role is particularly important given the multi-level governance of the structure of the funds, ranging from national, regional authorities to bodies at municipal, local level. For example, we estimated that there are over 400 different organizations involved in managing measures financed from EU funds for the integration of migrants in the period 2014-2020, an additional 500 bodies in cohesion policy only, implementing the funds. So the numbers by themselves speak about the complexity and the need for proper coordination. Because without that coordination, actually, there is the risk that this complexity may lead again to ineffective and inefficient policy implementation. So this is very much in brief what the paper is about. Now I'm looking forward to your comments and questions. Thank you very much for the attention.